September with ActionAid conducted in 3 countries. It will be very brief in terms of setting the tone, and then we will invite our 3 speakers, experts from the region, and have a dialogue. More of a conversation. We'll try to be informal, so that we speak what we want to. All right. So let me start with the presentation. So we did the study in DRC, Nigeria, and Somaliland. This year, earlier year, we have done similar study in other areas, and this is more of a, follow-up and looking into some of the policy aspect, both at the COP and also linking with funding. Right. So that was the background. But one thing that we want to say that women and girls, sometimes we say women only, it's not women and girls face the highest impact disproportionately. And I don't think I need to reiterate that. It's agreed and there are evidences. In terms of type of conflicts or the drivers of the conflict, one is of course the resource-based conflict, the power conflict, the agropastoral conflicts, conflict over water, land, and so on and so forth. And then we have these link between climate-induced conflict in a way that climate change puts pressure on the existing resources. And then it's also the access to the resources, and then social conflict, economic conflict, political conflict, that all interlinks with climate change. How do we kind of understand that at the local level is something we were looking at. The other thing we looked at is the gender-based violence. Now, it is evident that there is a clear link between climate and gender-based violence at the community. And there is also a link between the conflict and gender-based violence. Now, when we looked at that research, we saw evidences of the climate, conflict, gender nexus, along with poverty. When we talk about nexus in the humanitarian side, often we say humanitarian development peace nexus, which is the triple nexus. It's only recently we started understanding that climate is a driving factor. But in the climate space, we sometimes say climate and conflict leave out the development or the peace element. So how do we all, bring it together? And this is the evidence. It says that there are quadruple nexus, and there is a huge impact on women in terms of that. Health has not been talked much, only recently, but there's a serious impact on health. That is, when you say impact of climate change, of course, loss and damage, both in terms on the health and climate change. We have not done enough study in terms of that. Access to clean water, again, going back to that, there are some of these quotes and stories. We've seen in many parts of the world where climate-induced disasters are impacting the infrastructure and also challenging the social norms, social construction, which is sometimes irreparable. That also is having a lot of pressure on women and young people in many parts. Of course, migration and displacement, we've been talking about it a lot. I think if you look at the Horn of Africa region, and if you see how the pastoral communities have been not just being displaced internally, but also cross-border. If you go to there's this like a triangle between Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somaliland, and if you see how pastoral communities have been crossing borders, and also if you look at what's happening in Kenya right now, those communities who are moving from Somaliland, it's a very like close border, moving in, and there is this whole community of Somaliland and Somalians in the Kenya, which now has an impact in Kenyan society. And obviously, women and girls, again, you see how they are living in Kenya in an inhuman situation. So how do we deal with that? And all this impact, we talked about gender-based violence, health and everything, it's all exists both in Somaliland, Ethiopia, and in Kenya as well. Yeah, so again, we just wanted to, I think, set the tone saying that there is a nexus, there is this interlink, and we haven't talked about both in the UNFCCC as well as a national level. So when we invite the panels, we will have questions around that for the panel as well. A couple of things that we said is that what we found that the women rights organizations and women-led organizations on the ground have been doing fantastic work. However, they have not been financed enough. When you talk about adaptation fund and loss and damage fund, if you look at the mechanisms, there is no way to fund them directly. Maybe it's not feasible, what we've been hearing. However, what are the mechanisms that we can have where more money will be going to the local organization led by women? I think it's more of a localization of funding as well. Yeah, some of the recommendations are there. Obviously, we want to talk about strengthening women-led initiative, women-led organization in the fragile and conflict-affected areas. We are also asking the question about how loss and damage funding and the other funding mechanism can fund the local organization, especially led by women, the women rights organization and women-led organizations. So yeah, I'll stop there and I'll invite our speakers. We have a fantastic panel. Mary Frell, did I get your name right? She is the Senior Climate Policy Officer with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent National Societies. Dr. Ahmad Adli, I spoke your name correct? Yeah. So he is the General Coordinator of Arab Network of Environment and Development. Do we have any? We don't have any yet? Okay, we will wait for the colleague, but we can have a conversation, and then we will get back to the audience for question and answer and see if we can have a dialogue, finding a way forward. Yeah? All right. So, please come here. Yeah. All right. So I'll start with Dr. Ahmad. You are from the Arab and MENA region, and it probably currently is the most fragile context in a very difficult context right now. And you see some of these challenges exist. Tell us about what's happening in there, the climate impact, and the climate conflict gender nexus. How do you see it?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone here. Very happy to be among this nice group, and also with my colleague, the panelists here. In fact, in our organization, the Arab Network for Environment and Development, which is known as RAED has started the work on the issues of climate-induced displacement and conflicts. At the end of last decade. I mean, like maybe 2009, 2010. And we had a study that was done in 4 countries, in Jordan, in Syria, in Lebanon, and Egypt, in which it was very clear that the climate risks that many of the communities that are vulnerable to climate issues, especially when it comes to agriculture lands. So our focus was actually on agriculture. And the very strange thing that later in 2012, 2013, after we had this kind of what they called it, the Arab Spring, if you go and look at the areas where it has the highest level of conflict, you will find that they are almost the same areas where we found that, you know, they are the most affected by the climate risks in our study. That was 2-3 years before the events happened, which means that, you know, there is a direct relation between the level of conflict that you have in the areas because of the economic problems, because of the food security problems, because of the income generation problem, all these things, and the link with the conflict. The same happened in Sudan. We did not make the study in Sudan in Darfur, but later we had it in Kordofan. But in all the studies from Darfur very much also prove that we have the conflict that started by people mobility from one place to another, and this was definitely because of the land degradation and the desertification happening in these areas. So the link is there, and this is why when we are talking about climate justice, we are talking about peace, because once you have this justice happening, you are actually offering the peace for the people. And I cannot blame the people that they go and move and, you know, they as you give them the example between Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. I cannot blame the people because they have to survive. But once they are moved, you know, they are moving, they can have the conflicts with the recipient communities. And so you cannot blame the people because of that, but you have to blame the systems that were not able to avoid this kind of situation and is not helping, even if the situation is beyond their capacity, but they have to provide the support that, you know, for the people to be able to deal with and to survive. So this is why in RIDE we are very much keen about the community resilience, especially in the areas that are considered as vulnerable areas. We have right now, we just finished a mapping study in all the Arab states. In the mapping study, we realized that on the how displacement and climate-induced displacement is taken into consideration within the disaster risk reductions strategies at the national level in the different Arab countries. What we found that, you know, it's in a very few cases, maybe 3 or 4 cases, that the issue of migration and mobility was mentioned in the strategies. But unfortunately, it was not realized because people are looking at the disasters only from the infrastructure and from the response measures and so on, but they are not looking at the issue from the human rights when it comes to mobility, the human rights when it comes to preventive measures for how we can avoid the risks and reduce the risks that you could face in their communities. And this is why I'm happy to say that it is already taken by the League of Arab States, which is the higher political organization in the region, and it's also technical. They are putting this as a recommendation, coming strongly to the coming regional meeting that's going to be in Kuwait, we were talking about yesterday. It is going to be one of the recommendations to be taken by the ministers, to update the strategies at the national level, and we have to look at how we can also work and put in the strategy and integrate the issue of mobility and also the issue of climate risk on the different communities. Of course, you have linked the conflicts also with the gender issue. Yes, in our studies in the 4 countries I mentioned, and the 5 countries, including even Sudan, there was a clear link between the issue of gender and the conflict and the climate risk, because it is very clear in all the studies that the most vulnerable for these issues are women and children. Of course, the disabled also, the disabled persons are, persons with disabilities are also among the very vulnerable groups, but women definitely is also a big issue on our study and in the region.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad. Yeah, it's a very interesting. I would say it's a very critical region right now in terms of how things are, and when you see the amount of the level of conflict and of course geopolitics and impact on women. Just to give you an anecdote, one of our colleagues from Gaza, in first few days, it was very difficult emotionally for everyone, and then we tried to get her out of Gaza. The amount of, it's not just finance. There are so many other things that was factored with the children, everything, the way we've managed to get her out, but her family is still in there. The crisis of food, water, and aid and everything. So it's not just about conflict. I mean, in one of the reports by the UN, I remember 2017-18, it says by 2022 or something, Gaza will become a non-livable place because of lack of water and everything. So we knew that the links were there. It's not just the health, the trauma, mental trauma, especially on women as the caregiver or the I would say they keep the family together. So having all that, thank you for bringing all that up. Mary, Dr. Ahmad mentioned system. I actually have 2 questions for you. He talked about system, and system is not working. And in the COP for years we've been saying we need a system change. How do you see that change of system in the context of, I would say, averting loss and damage? You follow loss and damage very closely. So not just disaster risk reduction, how do we avert that? And whether the policy, whatever happening over the last couple of days, the text is out right now, how do you see it's facilitating the system change for women living in climate conflict affected areas?
So thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this panel. I'm Mary. I'm the Climate Policy Officer at the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent National Societies, which are present in 191 countries around the world, acting as an auxiliary to government and working in many different spaces and places, including conflict affected and fragile contexts. I suppose just to kind of peel it back, people and communities are not experiencing a crisis in isolation. And I think a lot of these lofty rooms and spaces can feel very far removed from the realities and the overlay of what is happening in people's lives. The worry about an escalating conflict, the concern about a heat wave that's just hit, not having enough food, shelter, displacement. Sometimes I feel like the climate space could do with a bit of a step back into what are the basic needs that are missing. How is climate and more extremes making that much more difficult for communities? And therefore, how do we need to act differently together in terms of finance. I think this is such an important space for us all to be in and to be having these conversations, but I think it's important to be grounded back in the research that you just shared and people's lived experience. I would say one thing that I felt was a helpful breakthrough at the last COP was a bigger discussion specifically around how to get finance to conflict-affected states. This was a bit championed by the presidency. It wasn't a negotiated outcome, but what we did have was what was called the Relief, Recovery and Peace Declaration, which was endorsed by, I believe it's now 94 countries, who have firstly acknowledged that there's a massive finance gap. And, there are many good reports that are out there for IFRC. We did a bit of digging into this with development initiatives and found that less than $1 per person was being allocated for adaptation and disaster risk reduction to people in countries affected by conflict. And that massive disparity of the lack of investment coming through is having huge consequences of loss and damage, being held by people because of that lack of upstream adaptation and development investment. I think there's a couple of system conversations that started as part of that. I think everyone talks about the nexus, but the reality is who are the actors that are present and who can deliver support. I think this is why it's really, really important, as your report pointed to, around having a different form of conversation around women-led organisations, but local-led organisations, and what needs to change in the financial architecture and funds in order to better channel support. We know that at the minute, climate funds less than 10% reach the kind of local level, and funds for mitigation and adaptation are set up in a different way, right? They're set up for kind of longer term investment, country ownership, as it should be in terms of connected to the NAPs and NDCs. But what does that mean in what does that mean whenever you're also dealing with conflict? There's a different I think type of modality which needs to be considered, and I think that's what the Relief, Recovery and Peace Declaration started to open up, and we've seen since that the GCF allocate 100 million to Somalia, and I think that needs to be the start of a much a real acceleration on, I think, firstly, the climate funds allocating finance differently, and thinking about what measures would help with that. So not to go too much into the kind of policy side, but some of the kind of practicalities that really helped was thinking, okay, well, what do we need to do differently in order to make sure that this works? So building in greater flexibility to spend. So you've got your adaptation program in place, you've kind of got your theory of change, you've got all of the elements you want to deliver, but building in a sort of a 10 to 20% buffer to say things will change over time, and we can't have the time to go back and seek reapproval from boards and from states. We need to build up trust and understanding that we may need to pause at certain points, we may need to reprioritize, we may need to move something that was in year 2 into year 3, we may need to have another community consultation. And I think that's different for the climate world. That will feel very comfortable and familiar for many of us in the humanitarian development, working more clearly in the peace space. But for climate, that's a different way of working. So I feel there's some very practical operational differences that we can bring and recommendations in order to, I suppose, support the climate funds in this journey to be able to release more finance. And I think the second thing I would maybe add is, we've now got the new fund for responding to loss and damage, where last week we had the agreement signed with the World Bank as a hosting entity, and there's a real conversation to happen now on access modalities and can we do this differently. Existing climate funds are a bit more in the kind of trickle down, we allocate there and then it moves down. And I think for loss and damage finance, where we know that there needs to be more immediate response, there's a need to build in resilience as part of that. There are different community access modalities which, can support women-led organisations to be able to access funds, and that's a live conversation that will be starting at the next board meeting, which will take place the first week of December, so directly after this COP. So I would say a couple of things. One, to kind of summarise, is we're seeing that start of a shift with the climate funds, but the gap in terms of lack of investment in mitigation adaptation is huge. And so how can we accelerate that, and what are some of those practical changes that can be made in order to build in flexibility and support? And the climate funds are very much on that journey. And the second is where we do have this new fund being set up, what kind of agile, more kind of community learning could be brought from Action Aid and by others, who've been really supporting channeling finance fast to organisations who've been doing incredible work. And I think that also comes down to a question of building trust, and getting to the heart of some of these big topics around risk, trust, and also, I think the need to be able to invest more meaningfully rather than maybe have a window in place or have something small. This is something which needs to move at a greater scale.
Thank you very much. Before we open for floor, I have quick two questions. Question to each of you. Let me come back to you, Mary, again, because you touched upon the element of what in terms of funding. So it's a bit more difficult when we talk about localization in true form, which I would say Grand Bargain has been trying to do a bit of it. But again, there are many questions. So if we want to do funding for disaster risk reduction, adaptation, and loss and damage, focusing on women-led organization initiative, do you think that possible through that climate process? And if yes, how do you see the global, national, financial interlinkages on that?
So just the easy question, and I think this is what many people are grappling with. I would say in terms of the loss and damage fund and funding arrangements, the kind of agreement was written in a way to say the fund should do many things and have many different access modalities. One being the absolute necessity to have direct budget release for countries directly following a loss and damage event, and that's going to be one of the kind of primary modalities. But it also has a number of other elements written in, including a community access window, our community access. And so our understanding as kind of wider organisations is that discussion will be taken forward over the next 6 months to try and operationalise what could that look like. I know there's many great civil society organisations, including Action Aid, who've inputted some ideas already from the perspective of IFRC. We also have different financial mechanisms which you could take lessons learned from, or from the START network or other organisations who have great experience in saying very quickly how do you get finance to local organisations quickly. And I think they're built on a couple of things. One is around having a pre-arranged understanding around what actions you will take place in different scenarios. So working with different local organisations to have the kind of contingency plan in place. For IFRC, we work on early action protocols, and so it's very clear what are some of the kind of parameters, but also the flexibility to be able to make decisions and to be able to spend finance where it's needed and to target it where it needs to go. So I think it's about how do you kind of learn from some of these systems and organizations where you could have a kind of parallel model which builds on, okay, you've kind of got a prearranged plan, you have this moment, you're able to release finance. There's a level of trust and understanding around how you will be able to move finance for XYZ roughly activity with a level of flexibility built in. And I think it's also an understanding that, it's not about moving money to where you can get it. It has to be moving money to where it needs to go. And I think that's sometimes where the adaptation finance has really struggled. And that's where I think there's an opportunity to think differently about loss and damage, and also to think about different sort of scales as well. What will be appropriate for a direct budget release will feel very different to the kind of really powerful change that a women-led organisation could do very quickly. And also thinking about different financial mechanisms like cash transfers as well, which are incredibly important within fragile and conflict-affected contexts compared to maybe the conversation that's happening elsewhere around use of social protection systems elsewhere. I'll maybe stop there.
Okay, thank you. I think I want to go back to you, Dr. Ahmad, on the question of system change. we talk about it. I don't think we fully have an idea in terms of how to do it. And in our organization, in ActionAid, we talk about decolonization. And when it comes to decolonization, and if you look at the whole, it's one of the colonization and the other processes are kind of, it's the underlying causes of what conflict climate really means, and obviously impact on women. Do you think it's even possible to kind of at least do localization of as an initial process of decolonization in the climate conflict spaces and the peace building? Everything has to link to peace building for women and young people and the young women in the communities.
I don't want to be pessimistic, but
No, be hopeful. Give us hope.
because we are discussing this all the time. And when you have mentioned Gaza, I was trying to avoid getting into Gaza issue, because for us it's when you talk about a system, the existing system that is protecting the violence and protecting the occupator, definitely if it will remain, nothing will change. So I don't think even if we go and meet some children in Europe or in the United States and we tell them about what the children in Gaza are suffering from, they will never believe that this could happen to human beings anywhere, and it's beyond their mentality to understand. So this is why when it comes to system, let me have two things together. We have the UN governance system definitely has to change, because the way it is right now is not putting us or taking us anywhere better than what we are. So if the system will be just and it will be fair, and this veto power is not used for to protect someone against working against humanity, against freedom, against independence, if this is going to change, this will be a real revolution at the global level. But let's go at the system when it comes to decolonization and when it comes to financial support. Definitely, the issue of decolonization is not only between North and South. It's also at the national level, at the local level. How far, for example, civil society organizations or communities could become, could have the access and easy access for resources. The figure you mentioned, it's only 10%. You said 10%, less than 10%. So, and then most of the money goes to consulting firms and so the system has to change in a way that we have to calculate how much we are investing in the people who are affected, and this is the figure that we have to look at, not at how much was taken from the north to the south, but we have to do it per person. As we are talking about the footprint, the carbon footprint, we have to look at also when it comes to loss and damage, for example, how much we were able to give. What $1 will do for someone who lost their land or livestock or their home or whatever. So this is why we have to change the indicators that we are using to calculate how much we were able to achieve something, and this is where we have to start from. And I think the civil society in this case could provide very good examples and also solutions for at the global level to can be used. And this is also how funding agencies, and you look at the discussions we had with the Green Climate Fund. Some people are talking about, they have been discussing a project for 10 years because the language is not. What language we are talking about? If you really believe in the problem, you should go and help and support. It's not what I'm writing on the paper. So this is also part of the system, how you can get the money. That we, in our communities, the communities that are suffering, they don't have the capacity, them or even the local authorities or even the civil society, to write the proposal the way the funding, the World Bank or the Green Climate Fund will accept. So, but the idea is, do you really believe that people are suffering? If I really work for the, to minimize the suffer and to provide the people with a decent life, the situation will be completely different. The language will be completely different. In some of the projects we have been dealing with, it is enough just to sit with the people and to listen to them, and you take notes and then you provide the support. You don't need to go into this very bureaucratic and very, So this is also part of the system. The mindsets of how we are going to make the transaction when it comes, from how it's going to be from the taxpayers, for example, in Europe or in the United States, to go for the victims that are affected by the climate. How this transaction is going to happen, I think this is where we need to change the system. I have to be optimistic. I think if we start thinking outside the box, if we change the mindsets, if we really believe in what we are doing for the humanity, things could be changed. And also building on the experience that already exists. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We already have organizations that have the capacity and have the experience, and we can have also more of the capacity development, especially when it comes to local communities, when we need really to develop their capacities to be able to be part of the process.
Thank you very much. You reminded me, we host ActionAid hosts a network called Feminist Humanitarian Network. And I think 2 years back, they pushed back saying, look, the amount of money you are giving us, and you are asking for about a format with a 30-page and everything, I'm sorry, we're not going to do that. And we asked them, what do you want to do? They said, this is the 3-pager you get. And we changed our system, both financial and programmatic, and we actually now advocating for communities and even countries and others to give us brief reports, whatever they want to do. It doesn't have to be tied with 50-page report, make it all look good. So probably that's one of the starting point that we have to lead with. So we're gonna go to the yes. Anyone else? I'll come to you. I know, Martin, did you still want to make a point? Do you want to come in or, yeah? So I'll start with the young person from Kenya first. And he wanted to talk about climate impact and health. Yeah?
So,
please.
thank you. I think if he has a question, then it might be better for him to first
go
of all
ahead.
start, because
Yeah.
I might take quite some time.
So let us take the questions first.
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is really a very touching discussion for two reasons. One, it talks about the practical scenarios that happen in the community. I'm from Somalia, and a country that has been affected by these shocks. On yearly basis, we have drought, floods, and then these mobility migration is something that is affecting. That we have people, the pastoralists in Kenya moving down to south central Somalia, and those in Somalia moving to Kenya when the drought happens. And if there's no cross-border programming to support this rural community, it's a challenge. Last month, I worked with an organization called Plan International. Last month, we had women-led organizations and discussion brought together over 40 women. And what came out clear was the access to finance in terms of their support of GPV survivors was not there. Then the system to protect them was not there. What was very touching was some of them cried when they were talking about the situation, because they said, we have even faced cases where we reported what happened in IDP camps, but we became the victims. And then, it was very, very touching. I totally agree on the point of the system change. I totally agree on the point of locally led solutions. I totally agree on the bureaucratic impediments in terms of changing the current modalities of access to finance. It is not friendly, it is not accessible, and it is not giving the local communities opportunity to participate. So my question is, as from an IFCRC, from my the doctor from the Arab Leagues, from Action Aid, what can be done? I think there is need to have a forum bigger than this to discuss about this and come up with a locally led solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Rajiv Jha and I work for NGO called Humanitarian Aid International and based out in New Delhi. Couple of observations. I wish you could have given more evidence in your study, could have more revealing here. I'm sure you have a lot of good evidences, but I was looking for some more evidences in the study that would have give you the major impact on this the issue you're talking of. Second thing, my question is to Mary, is that you talked about climate action taking a step back and providing space to the humanitarian needs. The fact is that they have already taken a step back. That's why you are having a space here and talking about the needs. So, and why so? Because climate change is the one who is going to converge on all the issues. It's going to be mother of all the problem. So to my understanding, it's more about developing a synergy and a balance with the different needs and the aspects or challenges, rather than I'm taking a step back and you taking the lead. So what is your point of view on that? Thank you.
Any other points?
Thank you. I'm from Vietnam. Vietnam has launched updated NAP, which highlights community-based solutions. So, with your experience, can you provide some lesson learned for the communities that suffer most by climate change? For example, those in remote areas and in Mekong Delta. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we take these 3 points first. Do you want to go first, Mary? Please.
Is this working okay? Perfect. So thank you very much. I will maybe go to the question around the kind of step back to start with. So for the Red Cross, Red Crescent, we're working as auxiliaries to government, and often we're supporting around not just response and preparing, but also around what can be put in place in terms of disaster law, preparedness. And so what we often hear in working both with the disaster management agency and department in country, as well as with climate and environment colleagues, is a need to bring together different parts of government, whether that be the health ministry, whether that be the disaster management agency, which is traditionally who we would work with, or the climate ministry and environment ministry, to talk about what does comprehensive risk management look like, and what does kind of multi-hazard early warning systems look like, and how do our responses need to work across different ministries as part of effectively one plan. Because what we're seeing, as we've kind of all commented on here, is not this kind of linear experience of disasters of, 10, 20 years ago, but really compounding, cascading risk, overlapping crisis. And so what I meant by sort of stepping back in terms of this kind of process is to think about, well, what could enable more of a comprehensive look at risk? And so we're thinking about this through the lens of a community experiencing multiple types of crisis. So yes, I've experienced an extreme heat event, But what is stopping me from being able to take action? Is it actually I don't have the right labour protection to be able to take time off? Is it that there aren't the right social protection mechanisms in place, and connecting with the finance ministry through to maybe the health ministry who's making the decision on what kind of warning system? So it's more about, I think, where we see change happen is at the local level and at the national level, and it's at this global level. What we, I think, should be trying to do is find those synergies to be able to help accelerate this. And I think sometimes it can be a bit difficult because people are thinking about, is that purely climate? Can it be reported against the Rio markers on this? And I think it can be helpful for us to be able to step back from that and say, okay, well, how do we tackle with these kind of multi-layered crisis that we're seeing, of which climate is absolutely driving and increasing vulnerability more and more so. And so I would say, how do we change that? I think is a conversation about, hopefully, that we get a kind of a strong NCQG at the end of this process, and we start to see greater finance being allocated across the spectrum, particularly to start to tackle the adaptation finance gap, and at the national level then that we're able to work local and national actors to be able to support the government around what are those interlinkages, so that response measures, adaptation, resilience building are kind of more neatly connected, but there needs to be the finance flow to do that. The other colleague had mentioned around locally led solutions and what can kind of enable that. I completely agree. And to our colleague who had mentioned around the grand bargain, while adaptation finance less than 10% gets to the local level, for humanitarian financing less than 2% reaches local actors, and that is so far off the targets of 25%. So what is stopping that? It's, I think, a conversation around risk and trust. Who is holding the risk? How can we rebalance that? And also about simplified access. So a practical example from IFRC, and really good to hear that example from ActionAid around what does reporting look like. We have a really kind of simplified process where if an emergency hits, we have a fund which any national society can apply for. It's a simplified 2-page application, of which there is pre-training, which happens all year round on a cyclical basis, regional, country level. And within a 12 to 24-hour period, there will be a review of that application and release of finance. If there is unable to release finance, there will be a meeting will take place within that 12 to 24-hour window to see if that can be resolved. And I think it's about having that attitude of what risk are we managing? Are we managing the risk of inaction versus, what's the wider risk that can be than that? So I feel like there's good examples that we could learn from which enable localization, but I think it requires trust, it requires will, and it requires doing things differently and thinking about what is it that the community need and what is it the local organization needs, because the capacity to be able to fill in forms and to do that is not there. People are already extremely overstretched, and so we need to think about what will support and enable action rather than being a hindrance to it.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. First of all, let me respond to my colleague from Somalia. Tell him I'm not from the League of Arab States. The League of Arab States is a government political body. I am from the civil society. My organization is a civil society organization. But we work with the League of Arab States, and I will come back to your question, and also to our colleague from India. In fact, the whole idea of establishing this kind of multi-stakeholder approach in, bringing all the different actors together, this is one of the challenges. As Mary said, it's one of the challenges that we have been, trying to solve at the national, at the local level as well. Because when it comes to disaster, in the case where we had our studies, and this is also to my sister from Vietnam, that we found that one of the lessons learned, that once you establish this kind of platform of dialogue, bringing the community with the different agents, the other agencies, definitely there is always a lack of trust or confidence among the different actors, especially between communities and other actors. So this kind of platform in the beginning, it was always, like everyone is afraid of the other person. But at the end, when they become, together sitting for some time, it becomes like, a process for confidence building. Once you have this, you find that there are a lot of resources. We still need the financial resource coming from outside. We need the global finance. But the global finance will never support everything. We'll never get into, the solutions or funding all what the problems that we're facing. So this is why you have to build on the local resources that you have. And when you have this kind of platforms of dialogue, you find that there are a lot of resources that could be used. But it's very, one of the lessons also that we found that bringing young people into the discussions and hearing and listening to them, this have a very, I would say, influence, very good influence on the process, because at the end of the day, those are the people who are going to lead these communities later. But unfortunately, they have better ideas maybe than people in positions, high positions. So this is why bringing the young people, women, into this platform of dialogue is very important. The second point that need to be also taken into consideration: don't forget the science, the academia. So in on all our dialogues, we're bringing the local universities into the discussion, because young researchers and universities are very important when it comes to scientific solutions. You need people when they listen to to ideas and also solutions that comes with the scientific proof. It's also good for the universities to hear from the citizens and to get the citizen knowledge into their So this kind of mix, bringing the universities with the communities, with the different stakeholders, it helps a lot in finding solutions. But the last point I wanted to also say here that how we are going to get this, I personally feel like, and we had it in many of the projects we are dealing with, we have put a target of at least 75% of your fund should go directly to the beneficiaries. When you put this kind of target, when you have this line, so everyone will work around it. But if you don't have this as a very clear number, that, it could take also more years to do. So I think one of the things that we could work together on at least 75 to 80% of the money should be directly going to the beneficiaries, the people who are facing the problems, the people who are really suffering. This is where I think the whole idea will change, even at the national level, even at the local level. So we have to change also the system inside our organizations to have more funds, the money more to go to the people for solving the problems and not to manage the solution. It's better to work, in a different way. And I think it works. We have many programs that is putting the 75 to 80% for targeting the beneficiaries, and it works very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you still want to? We have like 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes for you to talk about your experiences on the ground.
I think I moved to the front. So, hi everyone. My name is Matindi Benson. I am from Kenya. Yeah, and I work with an organization known as ACOFI, which is Africa Community of Planetary Partners for Health and Environment. I am also a volunteer rapporteur with the United Nations Environmental Program. Yeah, and I work with the marginalized communities in the northern Cape parts of Kenya, which are majorly arid and semi-arid lands. And sorry, I'm trying to hurry. Yeah, but I just want to support what the doctor said, my colleague here, that there is need to include the young people in these conversations, and not only the youth, but also the kids, because we, the youth and kids, are the people or the biggest demographic group that carries, we are the agents of change, if I put it in that context. We are the people who are going to actualize what you people in these global spaces are speaking about. We are the people who will make the real impact and carry the vision of our planet. So yeah, I wanted to mention that, but I also want to build on what my colleague from Somalia was trying to say, and quickly just paint a picture of the situation on ground, because that is where I work. Yeah. And I want to try and connect the components of climate change and its impacts on gender and health, and also peace and security. Yeah. So allow me to at least be different. Yeah, be different from the way my colleagues have been talking, and try and somehow base my my presentation so that you get the real picture. So think of a situation where there, of course, these are communities in arid and semi-arid lands, like I said, and these are in the lowlands mainly, and this is where people these people experience devastating droughts, and this is also where flooding occurs, because this is the lowlands where the rivers drain into. So these are floodplains during the rainy seasons, and these are also the areas that are impacted mostly by droughts. And the communities who you find here are pastoralist communities, yeah, people who rely solely on pastoralism. And saying solely, it means that animals are their only source of income, are the only livelihood that they have. That is where they get their food from. That is where they get everything from. So thinking about a drought, like for example, one year ago in Kenya, and in the northern part of Kenya, we had a very devastating drought where actually up to 95% of the animals were lost. Yeah. So think about the communities living there, how they survived there, and how the impacts of climate change trickle down up to the family level, because these people, first of all, they won't get something to eat, so that is food security. And with the situation there, drought affects the food systems, yeah. And that boils down to nutrition. Think about the pregnant mothers, think about the kids there, and the animals have died, so they have nothing. They are left with nothing. So these people are forced to migrate, yeah. This is where the issue of peace security comes in. So these communities are forced to migrate to other areas that they can find at least something to survive on. And now that is, they again meet another community that is suffering the same impacts. They are frustrated, and what will happen in that situation? There will be clashes. That is where the issue of peace and security comes in, and who are mostly impacted. Again, the vulnerable groups, which are the kids, the mothers, also the aged, and the people who are maybe the disabled also. And think about what this has on the human rights, yeah, especially the kids. So that means the kids of the rights of the kids are no education for the kid, no food for the kid. What about the women rights? The women are also, the rights of these groups are violated. Yeah. So thinking about and seeing climate change as a mother of all problems, like my colleague from India was saying, and as a stressor to the systems that support their livelihoods, that support humanity in these areas. I want to also talk about specifically climate change and health. Yeah. And so, yeah, the summary. So yeah, looking at climate change as a stressor, for example, to food systems, and also grounding these in the societal roles that the society has given different genders. For example, the women in Africa specifically, where women are taxed with collecting wood in these areas, also taking care of children, going to the rivers to fetch water. and talking about women and water quantity, water scarcity and water quality also. Thinking about how women suffer from water scarcity and water quality, pregnant mothers drinking that quantity, that water, sorry, and then thinking about hygiene and sanitation of the women in these areas and how sensitive the feminine body is. Um, yeah, so I'm rushing because I want to scratch everywhere, but I hope you understand, and I hope I can get some more time just to paint the whole picture of how the situation is and the role finance can play in this scenario. Yeah, and also to analyze the gaps that are existing within the national adaptation, the NAPS and NDCs. Yeah, so I hope to get some more time so that I don't juggle trying to scratch everywhere within a very short time. But thank you.
Thank you very much. I think yes. Thank you very much for taking the time and be with us. I think one solution, and this is the final word, that colleague mentioned, we need a platform. I think there are multiple platforms, but let's have a conversation if we need to find one platform to bring all this conversation to talk about Nexus and how do we deal with that. Yeah, with that, thank you very much. Please come in and have bilaterals with the colleagues and the panelists and share ideas. Thank you very much.